that is what a marketer does within a company. You're the eyes and ears of the customer experience. You are the voice of the customer, and you interpret what their experience is so that it can be improved across the company.
All right, let's jump right into the interview with Daniel Cotlar. Daniel is, my first exposure to you, Daniel, was at Rice University's Customer Management Symposium. And all of the speakers there were tremendous, but you're the one that was really memorable for me, and you stood out for a number of reasons. One is since I earned my Ph.D. in consumer behavior, you just seem so in tune with the consumer perspective. And to be honest with you, it wasn't really what I was expecting, because you were talking about blinds.com. And that's not necessarily the first industry that comes to mind when we think about customer-oriented marketing. And I really liked your approach. You were using some really cool and sophisticated tools for tracking customers and for adapting your marketing approach. So first, thank you for joining me. And it's such a tremendous value to my students for them to get this exposure to someone who's had your level of success. So we appreciate that. And let's just start off by, so you were the chief marketing officer for blinds.com for a number of years. So if I could ask, how did you come to be the CMO for blinds.com? And then maybe finish off by telling us what you're up to today.
Okay, great. My education was as a rabbi, so that's not something you typically hear. But I'll tell you that a lot of people who are in marketing have more philosophical backgrounds, and I think that is because it gives you an understanding and empathy for what the other person is experiencing, so you can better relate and create experiences for them. I don't know whether that's the case here, but coming out of that, I then came to Houston and went to business school at Rice, and was involved in a number of startups. Some of them went on to be successful, and a couple of them did not. And after doing that for a while and having two kids, I then went to work for Reliant Energy for 5 years, doing marketing there, online marketing. In general, the strain that's run through most of my experience has been analytical marketing or statistical, taking kind of a numbers-based approach to understanding the equations of customer acquisition and customer experience. So I did that, and then when I was someone I had actually worked on a startup unsuccessfully called me back and said, "Would you join me at blinds.com?" They had just started to make the company successful to a significant size. This is Jay Steinfeld, the founder, and I had worked with him during a time when things weren't working so well, and I learned what kind of great person he was and what he was like to work with. So I left a large company and the safety and the success of a large company to go work for something much smaller because of the opportunity to make a difference. I always like those building opportunities more than a running something opportunity. It was an amazing amazing ride. I was very fortunate to be there, working with one of the best mentors I know, and at a time when e-commerce was just completely on the ascension. And fortunate to be there, riding the wave and helping to develop e-commerce in our industry. Let's see what I'm doing now. So fortunately, we were able to build the company to about 200 million in sales, to the point where the Home Depot wanted to buy us. They didn't buy us because we were a blinds company. Which we were. They bought us because we were a platform for difficult buying experiences. So what we created, and we can get into this later, is something that could be applied to any difficult to buy custom product or something where there's a complex buying experience. First of all, we would fix their blinds experience, and we did. And then after that, over time, apply other products. So that's where they bought us, both a technology and a marketing and a customer service platform for those products. And I stayed on for 3 or 4 years and transitioned it over time to some of the people who were working in my department.
That's such a cool story, and starting as a rabbi and kind of learning to apply the empathy that you developed along the way to marketing experiences. I think you touched on a couple areas that resonated with me. One is that marketing is not just soft skills, which many students believe when they kind of enter a marketing track. So you mentioned your passion for the analytical side of marketing, which of course is becoming ever important now that we have access to so much cool customer data. And also just being able to see things from the customer's perspective. I think sometimes we think of that only in business-to-business relationships, but you've applied that to this B2C environment where you're offering custom blind solutions. And I also like that you built up a platform, so it's not just trying to figure out how to sell blinds to the end user, but this is something that's transferable and reusable, which obviously tremendously increased the value. So lots of excellent points, even though that was just kind of a background introduction. That was fantastic. So kind of digging more into the weeds on your own philosophy and approach to customer relationship management. What are some of the, just from kind of a 10,000 foot view, sorry for introducing some industry buzzwords into this, but how would you describe your approach to customers?
I'll start with blinds.com. What we had some very codified core values of the company. And those were things like, there were 4 of them: experiment without fear of failure, continuously improve, enjoy the ride, and always speak up. And then we had a platform of what the purpose of the company was, and that's to make people better than they ever believed possible. That means ourselves, it means our customers, it means our partners. A lot of the stuff is stuff you'll find anywhere as far as core values and purpose, but we really lived it, and it was on the wall. It was like pervasive. I bring this up because a lot of times, especially me, I told you the philosophical background, and so you might think it just comes naturally, the empathy for customers. The truth is, it's not like that for me, and I'm a very numbers. I'm the numbers guy, right? And so my natural state is just to be looking at numbers and figuring out equations and treating customers like that. So it's a stretch for me. But I'll tell you that I learned that it has to come from a place of a story that you can empathize with that customer's experience for you to be effective in talking to that customer. Remember, the customer is your brother, it's your cousin, it's people you're going to work with, and you can't treat them like some kind of a third party that's just nameless. So I think the first thing is to be able to really jump in and understand what that customer story is, live it yourself. And for us, we tapped into what the emotion of the customer story was, and this idea of making people better than they believed possible. On a customer view, that means these are people who would have had to gone to had somebody come and do it for them and pay a ton of money. And this way, they are able to accomplish something on their own and say, hey, look what I did. And it's like you actually have an emotional pride and sense of ownership. I've taken care of my family. I've done something that I never thought I could do, done some complicated, I know I'm not a handy person, and if you can tap into that and tell those customer stories, then you can have a much more meaningful conversation with the customers.
Awesome. So some of the things you just talked about there in terms of understanding the customer's emotions and the customer's story reminded me of one thing that you showed us at that customer management symposium, which was, and I don't know if you coined it the same way, but customer journey mapping, which is, again, something that's increasing in popularity in our field. So could you tell me a little bit about how you went about implementing customer journey mapping, what kind of data you used, and what it told you about your customers at blinds.com?
Yeah, sure. So imagine you want to know how life is, and you poll a bunch of 80-year-olds and say, so how was it? It's pretty good. And then you get 1 to 10 ratings of how life was from 80-year-olds. You're going to get a story that's important, but you're not going to get the whole story.
Right.
It's a long time at the end of the process. And I think that's what most people do in terms of their customers. They at the end of everything, how was it? And you get something from that. And that's wonderful. And I think we did that for many years. What where the nuance and the opportunity to improve comes in is where you start asking questions throughout the way. And it's identifying those moments that are meaningful in the whole process. What were your teenage years like? Ask them while they're a teenager, maybe. And then, when you get married and you have kids and you're, all these steps on the way, you identify those important steps, and then you create kind of a map and a rating for a satisfaction or whatever your tool you're using at each of those levels. And then you can say, all right, I can see kind of a roller coaster of where things are better, and then we fail here, and then we pick it up there. And then over a year later, people generally like us, or they don't, or whatever it is.
Right.
You get a much more nuanced, rich story, allowing you to take action on those things. Now, that's the first level view that goes from a single data point to a series of data. Maybe it's 5 points.
Mm-hmm. And did that map to the customer decision-making process pretty closely?
Yeah, it could. It's like the research and consideration, and then the actual purchase.
Okay.
Yeah, but it might not. It might. It's more just attentive to what where are the moments of truth that you're going to need to get a pulse.
Okay.
The next level down from that is to say, what does this look like for key clusters of customers who are in some way differentiated from each other? What does that look like for people who've heard about us from friends, or those who heard about us on the radio? Or so then maybe the source is one of the differentiators. Then a lens, I call them. If you take another lens, you might say, depending on what product they bought, or depending on what channel they use to talk to us and buy from us. You can have all kinds of different lenses that can inform the much more one level down on how you might be able to improve the experience.
Right. That's really cool. And the so to get the emotional pulse, because often you're looking for things like pain points, right? When you're doing customer journey mapping, was that all done through surveying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Surveying, and we didn't have sophisticated tools really. Just it's a matter. I think that a lot of the people think that you have to be some kind of a large data surveying agency or hire somebody expensive. You really can do all this stuff on your own.
Yeah.
And if you're worried about statistical significance, read up a little bit on that. And it really doesn't have, it's much more important to have a conversation and get used to polling your customers in a respectful and not too frequent way where they know that they are being heard. It's more important to get used to that than it is to have that big survey every once in a while.
Right. Yeah. And did you kind of set up listening posts for your customers? So you weren't always going out and getting the information from them necessarily, right? They had ways to volunteer information to you along their journey. Absolutely.
One of the things that the CEO, that Jay, put in place, even when he was a really small operation, was 30 days after somebody buys from blinds.com, they get a email that says, and it looks like it's typewritten, I mean, really old school, not HTML format. And it was like, if there was one thing you could change about your experience, what would it be? By that time, they probably installed the product, and they've it's not like right in the moment. You can get a wealth, and we did get a wealth of information over the years. And the other thing is, we assured every one of these emails is being read, and it's coming from Jay, and you're just writing in an email. It feels like you have a relationship like that, and you did for many of the first years. When things got to 1 million blinds a year or more, at that point it was hard to read every one of them. But we had a team reading every one and escalating to Jay and to us.
Okay, cool. That's cool that you stuck with that even as you really grew up in size. That's great.
Yeah, so that's one example of a listening post.
Right. That's awesome. Okay, so this could be related to customer journey mapping or not, but do you have an example, especially since you're someone with an analytical background, of where you were able to identify and fill some gap that existed in your marketing program?
Sure. I'm trying to think. For us, we were, what we were trying to be good at is to make the complex simple. That was the most important thing. So we look for pain points and throughout the experience, the transaction that could go wrong, and what were the main things people were concerned about. And we found that they were concerned about a few very obvious things. They were, I'm going to measure this wrong. I'm going to look like a fool and waste money. And it's going to be a hassle. My wife will be mad at me. The blinds will be sitting around the living room for a couple months, et cetera. So that's one big one. I don't even know if I can pick the right color and actually choose this right. I don't know if I can install it. So those are some of the big pain points we went through. So let's start. So what we did for the first was, and this is one of the big, I think, launch pads to accelerate our growth. We took the number one concern and tried to mitigate it. And said, I know you're worried about mismeasuring. Let's just put it on the table. If you mismeasure, we'll make a new one for free. And that was a big turning point. We called it the Sure Fit Guarantee. At first, we tried to sell it as insurance, measuring insurance. And not many people used it, and we found it was actually making people more concerned. And we just decided it's going to be our brand. We did some A/B testing, and we saw a 15% lift just from that reassurance. Now, the truth is that 2% of people ever used it.
Yeah.
But it's the reassurance. And the reason they so few used it is because we put a lot of things in place on the education side to make sure that we didn't create disasters.
Right.
But some people use it and they need that. So that was the first thing for measuring. The next thing was product choice. And for that, we created a blind finder, kind of a wizard that would have mimicked the same thing that you would do if you went to somebody's home as an expert consultative salesperson. Ask the questions. Hey, what are the main things you're worried about? Is it light? Is it blocking light? Is it, is it privacy? And then asking a few questions, you can whittle down 300 products down into 3. Right. And then after that, instituted free samples. So you can go look at the colors in your home, that kind of thing, shipped overnight. And finally, the last thing was about installation. Well, we wanted to show how simple it was, and that was through video. Now everybody has video, but it was a little revolutionary at the time. To have video and all this stuff and creating a lot of content. So those are some examples of making sure that along the way there's not just empty reassurances, but you're really hitting the pain points.
Yes. Yeah, that's great. And did your competitors follow suit pretty quickly with kind of picking up on all these things you were doing?
Absolutely. Yeah. You're always running. And it can be tempting to try and focus on oh, look, they're copying us. And of course, copying, you're going to get the best of what's out there also. We look for other industries in our case because we were the leader in our industry, but that wasn't too hard. And so absolutely they were copying us, and you have to just keep moving fast and changing the experience. The other thing you can do is, depending on your position of leadership, and for us, because we were strong, we had the best pricing from vendors and we had the best education for our customers. We want to create barriers where we want to actually take something that's difficult to do. It's those things that if we can do them, it'll be even harder for our competitors too. So yeah, it'll cost us 2% or whatever the number is, but it'll cost them 10%.
Yeah.
And so finding things like that can raise the bar on what constitutes an acceptable or a great customer experience, you keep raising the bar, you're making it more difficult for people who are in a worse position.
No, that's a great insight, because sometimes we feel like we put all this effort into improving our marketing program, and then the competition just comes in and swoops up what we've done. But we probably doing it first has probably conferred to us some kind of advantage that we can
6 months.
Exactly.
One of the things we did for that first thing was we assured before we even got started that we worked a deal with all the suppliers so that if the customer had to remake it, well, they gave us at a significant discount. So we wouldn't pay the 100%. So we worked out all these things, and then we rolled out the program. Our competitors wouldn't have had that worked out. And probably the suppliers would be in less likely to do that with them than they would us.
Very good. So we've talked a little bit about customer satisfaction, but kind of this holistic approach. I'm just curious, since you're the analytical person, what variables were most important to you? You did a lot of survey work. Were you looking at Net Promoter Score, or you had your just general customer satisfaction ratings?
Net Promoter Score was good. We looked. typical call center type polling, like after the call, would you mind answering, something quick like that. We also did some more implicit things than explicit. And that was, if we were a customer, what were the things that would define whether it was a good experience or not? So some things you might not expect being a customer experience score, but are more just how well the business is running, like conversion rate, or I would say, the website, percentage of people who come out the other end who come in. Another more nuanced way of doing that is a task completion rate. Not everyone who comes to the website at any given point is trying to buy. So if you're just looking at the 5% who end up buying, then you're ignoring the other 95% who might have had another task. If you can do a little more nuanced survey and say, what'd you come in for? Did you do it? Or you could type people implicitly. Then you can say, all right, this person came to get instructions, got them. You can get a task completion rate for your 5 main tasks in the experience. So that was one thing. Another is looking at something like the percentage of time that somebody has a post-order interaction at all. That we would rather they certainly don't want to call us. Yeah. They don't want to have to deal with us afterwards. They want everything to run smoothly. So what percent of the time, and you'd be surprised, like in our industry, it was crazy high, like 80% of the time.
Wow. Okay.
That somebody orders, there's something, like whether it's a status check, hey, where's my order? Because these things are being made in real time after they order. Or it's like I'm missing a piece, or the measuring, help me with the measuring, or the installing. So that's we had a very low bar in our industry, which is great. And then you can just improve on that over time. Looking at that the ratio between the orders and the post-order.
Right.
You also can look at how quick orders are resolved. Issues are resolved, and whether they resolved at the first time or not. So there's a lot of different numbers that look at that. And there's a longer term ones like NPS.
Right. I love the task completion rate, because one thing we try to emphasize in marketing is that we seem to fixate on the average with things like survey instruments. So looking at non-users and looking at your super users, these are important considerations, because they can sometimes give us the deepest insights, and especially with non-users, right? If we're trying to build up our customer base, ignoring them would be foolish if we have access to some data. So it's really cool that you were able to do that. Now, with all these variables of interest that you just talked about, did you have dashboards, or how did you manage all this stuff? Did you have a proprietary system?
I guess you could say that it was dashboards in various, nothing particular to say, oh, you should definitely get this dashboard, but you should definitely have a dashboard.
Right.
And it should be one that I'm a fan of metrics that are simpler and that are actionable. This is all obvious, but also ones where there's not a ton of movement up and down that distracts from the story. They have to tell a story. So some of the tools are used as things like trailing 12 months measures in some cases, so that you get much more, you wipe out the seasonality to the extent that exists, and you just get a smoother curve.
I think that just even you say it's obvious, but I think that sometimes we overlook the obvious and thinking that, and you've probably experienced this too in your journey as a marketer, but we can approach customer problems with a lot of hubris and think that we know the customer, or that maybe we are the customer. So we'll ignore some of the metrics that may seem obvious, or some of the tools that we should be implementing that seem obvious, but it really you find that these are commonly omitted things, and we make easy mistakes in marketing. So
one of the things that we tended to do sometimes is people use financial reporting tools or things that are similar to them as their basis for some of the customer stuff. And I find that because of the metrics you choose, and because of the fact that they're maybe in arrears of a month or two, it's like driving by looking in the rearview mirror.
Yeah.
Or like through binoculars in the rearview mirror. You're looking at like, how does that inform what you're doing today? And you want to make sure to look at leading indicators wherever possible. And if you're trying to figure out certainly what's about to happen, you want to be looking ahead. So finding those leading indicators, that's one of the things. Leading indicators also of customer satisfaction and success, the early indications. Another thing is not looking at the whole story at the macro conversion or the macro story, but micro story. Like, if you were going out and you're trying to find your life mate, you wouldn't look at the success ratio, the number of times you got married. It'd be, if you're trying to meet people, okay, how did that first interaction go? You're not trying to pop the question in the ring right on the first meeting. You want to know, get the phone number, and was it a good experience? That kind of. So without taking that metaphor too far, every day there's a micro conversion that tells you, all right, what percent of the time did they leave getting what they wanted? Right. Did they order a free sample? And what percent of those, came back within the next 30 days? Things like that.
Right. Oh, that's cool. I want to jump back quickly to one thing you mentioned earlier. You were talking about looking at some of your website metrics like conversion rate. Did you do A/B testing or any kind of experimentation? Since you're, I imagine you did, since you're, an e-commerce website. But what did that look like? What was your approach to experimentation?
Well, I think that's the lifeblood of an e-commerce and e-commerce company, and it's what drew me to the company is the ability to do that. Our whole the marketing department was themed the Idea Lab, and we felt we fancied ourselves lab, kind of scientists. So there's a lot of tools out there, some free, some paid, that make it super easy to do that. Just test everything, test incremental improvements. It's better to find 1% improvements, but to do that very often, you've seen charts that show what 1% does over time.
Sure.
And just continually lowering the bar on what it takes to try something. And that means, you have this amazing idea. Well, how can we try that within a few days of effort and be able to recognize and measure the effect of it? So we had some rules for testing. The fact that, number one, if you're calling it a test, it's actually, here's how you're going to measure its success. Number two, that if it's successful, it'll be significant enough to make a difference. You don't want to try something and not sure, first of all, be not sure whether it succeeded or not. So lay out the test properly. And even if it is successful, you don't want it to not matter at all. And then also you want it to be something that you can tell your mom about. So there were certainly opportunities to test concepts where we probably would have made more profit, but it wouldn't be something we'd be proud of. And so, like telling our customer list, after the sale, things like that.
Right.
So it was kind of a set of the guidelines for what constitutes a good experiment, and then have at it. Make it super quick to do, get an answer, move on.
That's great. You had one of your core values was related to experimentation, wasn't it? That you talked about?
Without fear of failure.
Experiment without fear of failure. I like that. That's very cool. Good. I'm going to switch gears on you just a little bit here to make things a little more relatable to a set of students that I encounter all the time. So we have students who are they're either entrepreneurs and they've started their own business, or they're going to be managing marketing programs for someone else's small business. Do you have any advice for these people? Because sometimes, and you've already said some great things in terms of how to do experimentation on the cheap, and how to kind of build your own internal dashboards. But what are the most important things to know about managing customers if you're just getting started or if you're doing it on a small scale? Because one thing that's great about you is you've been through a lot of different transitional periods in your career, and you've worked for startups and businesses that have grown up. So sorry to make the question so lengthy, but what is your advice for students like that?
The first thing is, as a marketer, I consider some people go straight to, oh, he's an ad or she's in advertising.
Yeah,
that's what the least important part of what you do.
Right.
And in our group, which eventually grew from one person to 40 people in marketing, it was always a minority of the team that was involved in customer acquisition in general and advertising in specific.
Okay.
So I would say it's far more important, 10-1, to, you've heard all the studies about the value of keeping your own customer versus procuring more customers, and how much easier it is to do and more efficient and cheaper it is to do that. But so much more valuable to understand and improve the existing customer experience. To me, that is what a marketer does within a company. You're the eyes and ears of the customer experience. You are the voice of the customer, and you interpret what their experience is so that it can be improved across the company. Right. Being in that position and being the eyes and ears and interpreting, you also know how to find more of them. Yeah. So that would be the first thing. And it's tempting to go for moonshots and look for new ways to find customers. We certainly did that and failed a bunch of times. I did things like advertising on dry cleaning hangers and a huge direct mail campaign to a bunch of lists that were unsuccessful. But where you'll find a lot of times the most value is in fishing where the fish are. And first, that means understanding the customers you have today, and going out to areas that are just like them. Other customers that are very similar to them. And it's more important to be very present within a small set of people. Like if you read Seth Godin and the concepts of tribes and things like that, be very known to and appreciated within a small set of people, and then you build that over time. Yep. Better do that, and an inch wide and a mile deep, than to be an inch deep and a mile wide.
Right.
Nowhere to nobody. So that's really deeply understanding your customers, finding more like them, and what we're able to find is this is what our customers are like, and here's where they're already hanging out. So it might be like, well, why am I going to go and advertise there? It's the same people, but there's a lot of people there. And so an example of that direct mail campaign that was such a big failure, we had about 10, 15 lists that all failed, but one list was successful, and that was the one that was going to people who we already have some interaction with, a house list. And we started a whole multi-million-dollar a year in cost and certainly in revenue, a direct mail program just to our house list, to people buying more from us and that kind of thing, or buying from us for the first time after having an interaction. So I guess the answer in summary is understand your customers and interact with them and people like them, and slowly build your notoriety and your appreciation within that set of people.
Right. That's awesome advice, especially for someone who's just getting started, because there is that kind of thirst for new market share that will make you, like you said, kind of go for the moonshot, look for new customers in places where none of your existing customers are today. And typically that's a quick path to failure. So I think that's tremendous advice.
It's not to say that you shouldn't have a few feelers out there to test whether there's some opportunity in other areas. You definitely should. And when you do that, though, make sure that you pick metrics that are, once again, that aren't the end of the road metrics. They're indications of interest. So when we started radio advertising for the first time, we didn't look at right away, are they buying? We looked at do we have people who are ordering free samples?
Right.
Or if you're a B2B company, maybe it's downloading a white paper. Or having seminar. Do we have people from that radio channel who are doing that? Look for leading indicators, little nibbles at the line of success, and then you can start to spend more time and energy where you have traction.
Right. That's great. And also, when you see how many radio customers are ordering free samples, and if they're not buying, then you can try to figure out how to move them, right, from the free sample to becoming a buyer. So I think that's awesome advice. All right. I've taken a lot of your time, but I do want to ask one last question, if you'll amuse me, which is kind of a broad question. But I want to ask if what's one really cool thing that you've done as a marketer, whether it's a story or some memory of a specific transaction or a campaign you ran for one of your startups or blinds.com, or some new product development you've been involved in, or even a social cause that's memorable for you. If you could leave us with kind of a parting feel-good marketing story.
This isn't necessarily huge, but I think that I'm happy to know that when we set up the SureFit guarantee that we'll remake it for free, we originally set it up so that you'd have to mail back the blind to us. We didn't want people to order 2 blinds for the price of 1. And that was the official rule. What we did over time, and 95% of the time this is what happened, is that if you wanted a new blind, you got it. And you didn't even have to do the old blind, just give it to someone who needed it, whether that's Habitat for Humanity or Goodwill, someone. And if you can get a receipt that says you gave the blind, we were good. So over time, lots of people, hundreds of thousands of blinds were given to people who really needed them, veterans and people, indigent, who just needed something to block out the light in their house and all that kind of stuff. So we got some really cool stories from that experience. And over time, grew the relationship. The Home Depot, for one, does a lot with Habitat for Humanity. And our employees always go out and are involved in those campaigns.
So I'm not gonna eat up any more of your day, but I want to thank you for just some tremendous insight. One thing that as marketing academics we sometimes fail to do is add that practical insight and talk to people who have actually put the theories we're talking about into action. And I appreciate you because you really you have a great sense for marketing and spirit for marketing, and I love your analytical nature, but also not losing sight of who the customer is and how to relate to that customer. So I think that in our short time together, you've been able to kind of weave together a lot of different things that we talk about in our marketing courses, and that's just tremendously valuable for me and also for everyone who's watching this video. So thank you. Yeah, we appreciate your time. And let's as you move into your next venture, let's stay in touch, and then maybe we'll have more good stories to tell.
I'd be honored. I really appreciate it. Thank you. And just one parting thought: you ask somebody questions about marketing successes, and you get the successes. It's like looking at a Facebook page. Oh, this is great, that's great. Well, you don't get over just 20 years. There's a lot of failures and a lot of difficult times. So I just want to tell your students not to be discouraged. There's been a lot of failures throughout that period,
right?
And you're picking up on the stuff that works. So